You're a failure.
And that's okay. Hi, I'm Dan.
And I'm Alicia. And we're failures too.
We take a walk back through people's failures and relive the mistakes they made so we all can have more clarity in how to be a better human. Hello and welcome to another inspirational episode of the 2020 Perspective. My name is Dan Newman from Learn to Scale, and I'm joined by my co-host.
Howdy, partners. I'm Alicia Engel, the other co-host of the 2020 Perspective podcast, where we talk about failure, juicy failures, and how our perspective shifts from it or how we learn from those experiences.
So today we are going to have a fabulous special guest that I was really inspired when Alicia found him as someone that actually could speak to us about failure. And when we reached out, he was like, yeah, failure? Hell yeah. So Alicia, I mean, tell us what you know about Dr. Steve.
Dr. Steve Yacovelli, he is also known as the Gay Leadership Dude. He is the founder of Top Dog Learning Group. And he works with Fortune 500s and not-for-profits, and he's an expert on diversity inclusion. And what really caught my eye about him is his branding, his background has a very Lisa Frank vibe to it. So my 12-year-old self really just felt immediately connected to Dr. Yacovelli. So we're pumped to talk to him about leadership, about failure, and about some of maybe his experiences with failure as well.
Well, then let's welcome to the podcast, Dr. Steve Yacovelli. Hi.
Hello,
Hi, Steve.
Dan. Hello, Alicia. Good to see y'all.
Hey, welcome.
So I'm excited to talk to you as someone who loves talking about leadership, but knowing that leadership and failure are just like, they're just brothers from another mother. So why don't you tell us a little about yourself and how you became Dr. Steve Yacovelli and the Gay Leadership Dude too.
Circle R to my lawyer friends.
With the R in the circle, yeah.
Right, exactly.
Own it.
Own it. I got it. It's my brand. So so I have been in the leadership, change management, and diversity inclusion space for most of my career, which has been like 3 years, I guess. No, I'm kidding. It's been quite a while. It's been the age more than the age of my nieces and nephews who are all out of college. It's always been part of the world, and I've really enjoyed that piece. And I worked internal, as Alicia said, with like folks like Disney, which was a pretty sweet deal. I was an IBMer for a while. I was a professor for like a hot minute after I got my doctorate. But then I really focused on taking my business. It was a part-time side hustle for many years. We started in 2002, and then I took it as my full-time gig in 2008, which was an awesome time to start a business.
Oh, it was a great time to start a business, and great recession.
But knock on wood, that's pretty much been my main jam ever since. And working with lots of leaders, mostly in North America, but throughout the world, just kind of helping them be more awesome than they already are.
More awesome than they already are. That is so growth mindset. I'm in that.
We love growth mindset on the 2020 Perspective.
Yeah.
So how did you become the Gay Leadership Dude? When did that arise?
You should ask Alicia, when did I come out as the Gay Leadership Dude?
Oh, okay. All right.
Sorry. So it actually started in 2018. So it's only been a few years. And I was going down the path of, flashback. I was at a conference, actually the National Gay and Lesbian Chamber of Commerce conference. It was in Philadelphia that year. And so it was my first time there. And I was like sorting my business cards, and there's a woman next to me sorting her business cards, going into a next session. And she's like, what do you do? I'm like, blah, 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 consulting. How about you? And she's like, I'm a publisher. I'm like, there's a leadership book on my head that needs to come out. She's like, let's get that darn book out of there. And flash forward, that's my publisher, Jen. She's amazing, publisher Purpose Press. And so I was going down the path of, just kind of doing the quote unquote generic leadership book, just through my perspective of what I've done over the 25 plus years. Mm-hmm. And then y'all ever see Sex and the City?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
And then if not, if the listeners, if you haven't, it's pretty still cool. You can stream it.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you've seen that show, they're Carrie Bradshaw would sit down at her little Mac, and she's like, I couldn't help but wonder. And she starts typing away. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, I'm in this leadership book framework, my mindset there, and I do a lot of work with social justice and other LGBTQ groups and others. And then I started watching my queer brothers and sister leaders out there, and I'm like, I couldn't help but wonder, is there something about the gay experience, using the generic term, that helps you focus your leadership energy differently? And so I did the pivot, as I hate that word now after this pandemic, but I did the pivot, and so focused the book on there. And then of course, Jen, my awesome publisher, said, well, you need a personal brand. I'm like, well, I have Top Dog. She's like, no, you need a personal brand because you'll win the lottery and sell Top Dog. And then what do you got? I'm like, that's a good idea. So thus the Gay Leadership Dude came out of the closet.
That's amazing.
Gosh,
I need that. I need like a very snazzy personal brand like that. Well, I mean, it really is eye-catching.
Well, what it's I mean, and there's actually the scientific reason why I did it. It wasn't just because it was cheeky fun. It was, as somebody who is technically an invisible minority, because, I have to disclose my difference to people, that does it for me. So it's like, 3 things immediately: that I'm gay, that I self-identify as a dude, and I like leadership. So it's like right there.
Yes. Straight to the point. Love it.
So, you must have, I would imagine you've stumbled a couple times in becoming this personality, becoming this person, and building a business too. So, I mean, what's your relationship with failure? Are you like dating? Is it like getting serious? Like thinking about popping a question?
No, we go way back. We were lovers for a while. Now we're just BFFs, and we kind of always Skype each other once in a while or Zoom call and all that. No, I actually have always thought failure wasn't so. Years ago, before I failed, quote unquote, at least like from that really significant way, we all fail, of course. But I always thought, like, especially teaching leadership or failure is an awesome leadership tool. And, I would, spiel that, if you will, as we used to say at Disney.
The textbook version of failure.
Right. You should always learn from it. And then I got fired for the first time, and I'm like, what?
Yes, everyone needs to get fired.
Everybody should get fired. It was a horrendous experience, but my goodness, did that teach me so much. I'm like, dadgummit, I was right. It is a great teacher. But it was one of those. I was working for a software company, and all my BFFs were there, had been there for many years, and sales just weren't where they weren't. And I, of course, was in the training department. And hey, you're not a profit center. See ya. And so but it was just, well, why me? You go through those stages of mourning.
Yeah.
And so, but it taught me the most amazing thing about failure, and that's the concept of resiliency and how I hate the word how you bounce back. And you survive and thrive if you do it. And sometimes if you just survive, totes okay. I mean, that's I work with so many people over the pandemic, and they're just like, I got out of bed today. I'm like, you know what? Then that's a good day. And others who are like, I did my audiobook. Okay, this is me. I did this. But I'm like, I did my audiobook during pandemic. And I'm like, yeah, I rock. So it can go either way. Success is how you make it. There's no judgment there. But just being resilient is the best teacher out of failure.
This is eerily similar to our conversation, a month or so ago with Dr. Taryn Marie Stayskoll, who is all about the resilience and that idea that you don't just bounce back, you become more, you change, you evolve. And it's never just you return to who you were before the failure. You're always changed by it.
Yep. Right. It's actually one of the classes we teach at Top Dog Learning Group is how to be resilient in times of change. And which is kind of fun. But I actually started at, when I started getting into the psychology of it, it was when I was with IBM, because I was a change management consultant. And so we would go on a project, and all my cool techie folks would be like, we're going to create the solution. And my job and my team was, okay, we're going to help the humans use it. Because, a lot of times people are just like, hey, here's an awesome new tool. Thanks, I'm good over here. And they go back to their old business ways because they change. And so the concept of resiliency was something that kind of was thrown at me. I knew about it, but then when I really had to do it for my job, I'm like, oh, this is pretty interesting.
So. What are the top 3 strategies to being resilient?
Or is that a trade secret?
It's absolutely not a trade secret. So how I think about it is, so I even have my slides here. Oh, perfect. So and there's a lot of great research. I'm like, nerd. What's my doctorate? Distance learning, yay! But I mean, if you look at all the research out there, I mean, there's so many great books around resiliency. There's a lot of common threads, and that's kind of what I liked about them. So I kind of distilled. I think it was like I read like 20 some books on resiliency and kind of pulled out my own threads. And the one thing that I kept seeing is positivity, something about, having that glass half full mentality, really being able to say like, well, that was a really horribly crappy day. Remember the kid's book, Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day?
Yeah.
Anyway, if you
don't triggers a memory.
Like something in childhood, I must have.
It's a fantastic book. It was about this little kid who just had like this terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. And he always would say like little things would happen, like his shoelace would break. He's like, this is a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day. I'm moving to Australia. And so that was like the big joke in the book. Well, we all have those days. And the smart, resilient person will say, you know what, this is a crappy day, but what's something that went well? Hey, I just had a big pitch to a client, as we were just talking about a few minutes ago before we started, says Dan. But, and it didn't go as well. He didn't say that, but we'll pretend. And it's like, well, Great. But you know what? Hey, I made some relationships today. That might lead to something down the road. Who knows? And that's a really big key to resiliency, is having that positive perspective. And, I always say this, being former Disney, it's not the, oh boy, everything's great. It's not that stupidity. It's not the rose-colored glasses, or rosé-colored glasses, as my husband says. But it's really, really understanding, rosé-colored glasses. But it's really understanding that, if you can find the bright spots, even in the worst, then you're good to go. And that's a way to be resilient. And the second way that I've seen is, I call it having a healthy self-concept. And so it's knowing that, we've all been in those low points. I got fired from 3 jobs in my career. So I know that if I get fired from that 4th job, you know what? I bounced back before. I can do it again. What are the resources I use to get me from that low point to that high point? And what is the value add that I know I bring to the table? So it's really, a lot of it's about self-esteem.
So that's trusting yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Really having that concept that, I got this. I got it once before, I can do it again. And then the third, and probably my favorite and probably the hardest, is being comfort with uncertainty. And when you think about change and when changing times happen, like, let's say a pandemic, it's what can you do to be okay with the big question marks that are out there? And this is usually the biggest sticking point for people to be resilient, because this is the one that goes against like our hard wiring as cave people, and what that looks like. Because uncertainty is lack of safety, which is vulnerability, which means the species is going to die. And so that's kind of how our little cave head is working even now. And so we really want to be comfortable with those question marks and really focus our energy on the things that we can control or influence. Versus what people tend to do is focus on the things that they can neither control or influence, and they're just like spinning their wheels and wasting their energy and all their chi and stuff. So there's the 3.
I know. I love this. How do you help people through the first one when they are it's not just like a bad day, like the kid that wants to go to Australia, but it's like a season, and they're like in the grips of, the shit storm, and it's really hard to get out of it. Maybe it's like a, COVID, or, being in a really bad position, but they love the company and they just like don't want to leave, but they're in this role that like they kind of
golden handcuffs.
Yeah,
totally. Golden handcuffs, asking for a friend. So how do you help someone, a leader, get through that, like a season of the shitstorm?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question, because a lot of it goes down to your own personality type and kind of how you approach the world. But there are strategies you can do to kind of help people exercise and get comfortable with that positivity. One strategy that we do in some of our workshops is at Disney, we always said we repurpose things. We never steal them. We repurpose them. So I repurpose this from counseling psychology. It's called it goes by a bunch of names, but the What Went Well Journal. And it's where at the end of every day, you write down 5 things that went well that day. And even if you had the terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, you force yourself to find 5 bright spots. Yes. And you put them in your phone, write them in a journal, whatever. Well, studies show that over time, depending on your starting point, maybe 2 to 3 months-ish, you actually start to rewire your brain. to look for the positivity. It's kind of like if you've ever bought a new car, or a new car to you anyway, and you're driving. I'm looking at my Mini Cooper. I have a little tiny Mini Cooper because I never drive, because it's Florida. But I get my Mini Cooper and I'm driving around. I'm like, wow, everybody has a Mini Cooper. They must have said Steve has one. That's a cool car. No, that's not what happened. I have a heightened sense of awareness. It's the same cognitive trick that you do with the What Went Well journal. If I'm forcing myself to find the 5 bright spots, I'm going to start seeing more than 5 as I progress through my day. So that's one of many strategies we play around with to help folks see that glass half full a little bit easier.
Yes. Ooh,
so you've got a wealth of these kind of like hacks, best practices, optimizations, insights. What do you find personally to be something that you keep on coming back to as like a failure touchstone, or the thing that realigns you? What have you found to be most useful for you?
Oh, great question. I think for me, it's, and you wouldn't know it from my corn tummy, but doing physical activity has always been my go-to, whether it's practicing yoga when we could do that, going to the gym. Yeah, I mean, now I am addicted to my Oculus, my Facebook Oculus, and there's amazing fitness apps on there. My husband totally makes fun of me because I have the goggles on, my earphones, and I'm hitting like these, what looks like in my head, these targets with sticks, and I'm doing all these great songs, and I just look like somebody who's going into some sort of, yes, exactly, Dan, like
flailing, just flailing around.
He's recorded me like twice. I'm like, no, delete that. Never do that again.
Never again.
But those types of things, I think, are for me one of my favorite outlets, and that's actually was the hardest part at the beginning of COVID. Was I had most of those taken away at first because I couldn't go to the gym, I couldn't go to the yoga studio, and I couldn't do my stair stepper machine, which is my favorite listening to podcast activity ever. And now I'm like, wait, we have a hot tub and there's 2 steps there. So I've been going up and down those things. It works. Hey, it's fun. I do it for like 30 minutes and my dog's looking at me like, you're getting nowhere. What are you doing, Daddy? And those types of things, I think there's a really big opportunity to deal with, change, resiliency, and the physicality of kind of getting out of your own head.
Okay, I could not agree more. Dan knows this about me. I preach about the act of movement, even if it's just, it's not about getting the 6-pack abs. It's really giving yourself the space to let your brain like clear out and collect and organize your thoughts. And it's almost like, meditation via movement. It's so crazy how much it helps you.
Yeah, and you hit a really awesome point too, Alicia, is I forget what the name of the book is, but they interviewed, I think it was like 50 experts in their fields, like Michael Jordan, Yo-Yo Ma, and all these people. And they're like, when do you get your aha ideas? All of them, hands down, were like, when I'm not doing what I'm known for doing. And so it's like, when I used to swim a lot back in the day, and I love swimming because waterproof headphones, go and do my little breaststroke and be like, oh, I need to do that for a client. Swim in the next lap and listen to that code. And like, oh wait, this is how I need to approach that project or that problem. And you're right. It just, you get out of that space and suddenly the universe, God, Buddha, Allah, insert whatever here, kind of has that conversation with you.
Yep. Yeah, I had that conversation with myself this morning. I went to the rock climbing gym. Nice. Got up early. Rock climbing, you're like solving some puzzles, you're grabbing some things, your little fingers get tired. But in doing so, you focus your attention on something different. And then all the machines in the back of your brain just start clicking away, and you come back and you're like, holy smokes, I got it. And then things happen.
Well, and I think too, if you looked at neuroscientists over the last maybe decade or so have done some insanely cool research and stuff. And so our unconscious, we're getting 11 million bits of data at any one moment right now. Anyone listening, anyone watching, 11 million bits of data is hitting your head. Yeah, it's all the cones in your eyes, the cilia in your ears, every nerve ending, everything getting bombarded with data, 11 million bits. But your conscious mind can process 40. So
40 bits or 40 million?
40 bits of data. So
wow.
The 99.99996%, the delta, is your unconscious mind doing its job. It's your operating system. And when I learned that fact, I teach a lot of courses on unconscious bias, so that's kind of why I'm pulling this stat out of my head. But it's fascinating to think about how your mind works. And so, when you're unleashing that 40 bits when you're playing tennis or swimming or yoga or rock climbing or whatever, then it's like boom, and it it pops up and it's just so wonderful.
Whoa. I can't unknow that fact.
No,
I can't unknow it.
It's awesome.
The bits. Oh gosh, Dan's all about the bits. You know what's interesting is, speaking of this, idea about how when we're kind of like in the thing that we're not supposed to be doing, not supposed to be doing, but not our thing, we're giving ourselves that time and space to just like be. I heard a TED Talk, I guess it was a couple years ago, about how right now we have this creativity crisis because we're constantly, looking at the bits and our brain is constantly going, like, even when we're sitting and maybe like sitting on the couch and having like a zone out, I'm going to watch a 20-minute show. You're also on your phone checking email, and there's really no downtime to let the neurons in your brain connect. And I don't know, you probably know more about this than me, but to let them do their thing and then to help give you the ahas. And so we're just like drained and burned out and failing along the way. I'm not being glass half full right now, but I like to be glass half full.
No, I think there is something to be said about the concept of, connectivity being a blessing and a curse. And I've seen this with some of the folks that I've coached and worked with is, they don't feel that they can let go even on holiday, or they're out with their family or whatever, and they're just like, oh, let me just check my Facebook, or let me look at it. No, stop. And hey, physician, heal thyself. I'm guilty of it as well. But self-awareness is the first step. Thank you very much. So, and that's, I think the opportunity is to find those times to disconnect, or, I started, I have the problem where I always want to be productive, and I need to give myself permission that, Steve, you can go watch The Magicians or whatever's streaming on Netflix. And I just start watching that again because it's fun, but whatever is out there, and just be okay with that. That's, for some of us, easier said than done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
definitely.
So I'm really interested about the work that you're doing with Top Dog Learning Group, especially around inclusive and effective workplaces, because a lot of people that I've spoken to, they see failure as something so huge. When you're talking about inclusivity, you're talking about diversity, equity, is that people are almost too afraid to start for fear of failure. Yeah. I mean, how do you help people who are afraid to start because the ramifications of being canceled or being unkind or unintentionally racist? Yeah. I mean, how do you help people get started with that?
It's a beautiful question, Dan. And listeners, viewers, we did not pre-plan that. So I'm glad you asked that, because it's what I do every day. And, I started using the phrase being a consciously inclusive leader. And that's a very conscious reason I'm using that. Actually, a quick story. I first started playing around with unconscious bias training when I was at Disney many, many years ago. And I was doing a workshop on unconscious bias. And there's a gentleman kind of toward the back of the room, and he's doing that body language, like, scowl on his face, arms crossed. Yeah. And, during one of the breaks, I walked back and checked in with him, and I said, Bob, or whatever, is there something on your mind? And clearly he was voluntold to be there. So there was something on his mind. And he's like, you're talking about unconscious bias. I'm like, yes, that's correct. And he's like, well, if it's unconscious, I can't do anything about it. And I'm like, oh gosh, thank you for that perspective. And actually, that's not true. So that's when I stopped using unconscious bias and started using consciously inclusive. And if you're a leader, there are things you can do to be more consciously inclusive. And a lot of it has to do with, mindfulness, which we actually already talked about a little bit, and looking at those different ways that you can really be a good ally for others. And that's kind of how I approach it with folks, is helping them, develop their allyship and also open that space, whether that be virtual or otherwise, to ask those questions, and especially ask them to an ally, because you have this a little bit of a feeling that I can approach an ally a little bit differently than a member of insert whatever group here. Right. And so when you kind of open up that space and say, hey, I'm here. If you want to talk about, I do a lot of work with the trans community as of course, a group part of my broader LGBTQ+ community. But I say, I'm not an expert. Obviously, I don't know what it feels like to be a trans person, but I've done some reading and understanding. I'll happily answer questions. And I think it's also positioning it to know that an ally should at times be in front of the person they're being an ally for, to the side of that person, and sometimes just get their back and let them take in charge, and open yourself up to be flexible with where your allyship needs to go.
I love the idea behind that. So I don't know if this is related, but maybe you can talk to us about pride leadership. Like, what is pride leadership and how does it fit in with conscious inclusivity?
Oh, I love it. Thank you. And another segue. So when I wrote my book, Pride Leadership,
hey!
Of course I have a slide. Of course I do. So when I wrote Pride Leadership, Strategies for the LGBTQ Plus Leader to be the King or Queen of their Jungle, it was a really interesting journey because I was trying to figure out, well, what is that difference? What's that Carrie Bradshaw? I couldn't help but wonder thing. And so when I first started thinking about what makes, in my experience, an awesome leader. And what I did was I boiled it down to 6 competencies that I've seen leaders use that are just rocking and rolling. It's authenticity, courage, empathy, communications, relationships, and culture. And so, that was my top 6, regardless of before it was going to be a queer book or not. And then, and it's for allies too, by the way. I have a lot of allies read it and they're like, this is solid leadership theory with awesome cheeky dad jokes. I'm like, yes, that's me in a nutshell. And so, but putting it through the lens of, let's use authenticity as the example. If I am an out gay person at work, and by the way, statistics show that only about 50% of queer people are actually out at work in the US right now, which is still way too little. But if I'm out at work, I'm being my authentic self. That's wicked powerful, as my friends in Boston say. And so, okay, great. That's awesome. Now, how do you channel that to be an even more awesome leader? And so if you look at any of the research out there in general on, authentic leaders are better, in general, period. Why? Because they build trust. People trust them. They're not that, phony facade on I'm just the boss kind of thing. No. So, you flash that through the rainbow lens, as I like to say. And that's kind of how the pride leadership comes into play. Absolutely. All of the stuff I talk about is guaranteed to be applicable to our straight allies. But no one's spoken to my community this way ever before, really. And that's why I thought, you know what, this voice needs to be happening. And one last quick story. When I wrote the book and of course submitted it for my first round of edits with Heather, the editor, which I like to call her because it just sounds fun. So Heather called me and I'm nervous wreck. I'm in a coffee shop in downtown Orlando, like being called to the principal's office, like, oh my gosh, the second person in the universe read my book. And she's like, hey, Steve, I have feedback for you. And I'm like, okay, bring it. She's like, first of all, I am not your target audience. I'm a white, cisgendered, straight woman. I'm like, and she's like, this is the book I wanted in my MBA program. I'm like, what? And she said, solid theory, well-researched, cheeky dad jokes. It has a lot of personality. And she's like, you need to de-gay the book. I'm like, no, I will not do that. I said, because our allies will be able to enjoy it just as much as members of my community. She's like, that's fair. And so that's kind of how the book evolved. And I encourage anyone, we actually do a free plus shipping offer in the States. So we'll put that link in the stuff, just because my goal is not to make $1 gazillion of it. It's to get the word out and help leaders be even more awesome than they already are.
Wow.
Okay. There's so much that I want to dive into. There's so many different directions I want to take this. So, we talk to a lot of people about failure, and one of the common themes are red flags. And, oftentimes you don't notice the red flags until after the failures actually happen, but that's how failure works. And thinking about your inclusive leadership, if someone is aspiring to be an inclusive leader, are there red flags to look for that they're not being inclusive? Before, someone's soul has been crushed or, a demographic has been ignored, what are some of the signs that you've seen that someone might be dropping the ball around inclusive leadership?
Oh, it's a great question. We could spend a long time talking about it. But there's little things. Well, there's big and little things that I see leaders do where they're not being as inclusive as they could be. And the number one thing is where they don't step up and talk about when someone disparages another group and they're not part of the group, they're just kind of sitting on the sidelines and they don't say anything. It's called silent collusion. So for example, several years ago, I was in Atlanta with a client and we were doing like a closing, we were doing a change project or something. And it's myself and one of my top doggers, which is what I call my consultants. Lori was sitting next to me and it's the two of us and there's like 38 of the clients because we're in their space. It's like, oh, yay, we're finished. And we're just about to start the meeting. And the senior executive, kind of at the head of the table, who is male, and that's important to the story, just as we're about to start, and everyone, the voices are dying down, and you hear him say, "Well, you know how all women drive," and everybody has exactly the reaction. Everyone just stopped, kind of looked at him, but no one said a word, and that's technically called silent collusion. By our silence, we're actually colluding or supporting the disparaging statement said. And I think that's the number one place I encourage leaders that I work with to not do. Even if you're coming at it from a heart-centered place, it's a fantastic way to undermine your own credibility and ruin the trust you've built, because people are always watching leaders and they're taking notes, whether they like it or not. And that's the challenge of leadership. And so if you're not stepping up and saying something about that group, and people are thinking, well, what if it's my group? Or what if you are in that group? What if you're one of the women in that room and no one says anything? You're like, well, what the hell? And so finding ways to beat silent collusion in my book and in some of the things, and actually we'll put this in the chat as well. I have a free training. It's like, we call them learning tapas, a top dog learning group. It's like the 6 ways to beat silent collusion. Like in that moment, live in that moment, how can you not engage in that? I think that's the very first thing that any leader striving to be consciously inclusive really needs to do.
That's a tough thing to do. I mean, that is so challenging. Whenever I was at my last organization, we had some scenarios for one of our leadership development programs very similar to this. And it was kind of like option A, B, C, D, what do you do? And you think that the appropriate thing to do, like in this example, would be, maybe to go take this gentleman aside and say, hey, that wasn't cool. Don't do that. That's actually not right. Like you're supposed to say it in front of the whole group. So it's a norm that this is not acceptable. And a lot of people don't know that because it is so difficult. It goes against everything that we've been told. If you don't have something nice to say, don't say it at all. And it's like, who created that and said it was okay?
Yeah. And you hit a very perfect example, because a lot of people think that that's the right thing to do. Oh, I'll just pull them aside. That's better than just letting it go, sure. Right. But you're right. I mean, it's you address that right then and there, or you at least make it known that you're not on board with that. And so in this learning tapas, it's called Mop Sam. It's the 6 ways, and I introduce it as there's this dog, and the image of the dog is a Hungarian pulley mop. If you've ever seen those dogs, they look like they have dreadlocks. If you stuck a stick on their back, you could do your floors. So they're called a mop.
Yes, I know you're talking
his name is Sam. So between his name and his breed, Mop Sam, it's the 6 ways to remember in the moment how to beat silent collusion. So it's
nice visual. No, I won't forget that.
Exactly. So what's mind-blowing to me is that I distinctly remember sitting down for an HR certification exam, and I will not name the exam, that cited the pull someone aside and address individual concerns and privacy as the correct answer versus setting a new policy on the spot. Because it was seen through at least that exam's eyes is that policy making is equivalent to addressing cultural norms. And I would say that that's not the case. I mean, I fundamentally disagree with it, but I still answered it right in the exam.
Right.
But,
to get the letter.
But like that's the mindset that a lot of people who are in positions of power are being groomed to do, is that issues are private, individualized versus, someone's statement being representative of a community.
Right.
Yeah. No. And I purposely did not take that exam, Dan, for similar reasons to that, because I think there's such an opportunity, again, see, glass half full. There's such an opportunity for us to share with others, different ways to approach leadership that maybe aren't the norm. Another, and it's a very small one, but I'm a very big zealot on it, is you see especially some HR groups, teach the sandwich method of feedback.
The sandwich method.
The sandwich method is horrible. It's horrendous.
I am like pro and con sandwich method.
I hate the sandwich.
Which we could dive into, but it's not exactly tailored.
And if for those listening, if you are watching, if you don't know the sandwich method, it's where you're taught to provide feedback to somebody where you say something positive, negative is the meat in the middle, but still end on something positive. And it can go totally pear-shaped, as my Aussie friends say, because I could walk out of the meeting and be like, well, Dan said something positive, because that's all I remember at the end. And you missed the first bun and the meat, which is the negative one. Yeah. Or, if this is, how Alicia does it all the time, like, oh, Steve, you did so great leading that meeting. However, you missed 3 agenda items, blah, blah. So now if that's, we're all Pavlovian dogs being conditioned. If that's how I'm always receiving feedback, then I'm always going to, 1, ignore the first bun, even if it's valid. And
right.
2, have a little less credibility when Alicia comes and says, I have feedback. You did great, whatever. Get to the end. However, there it is. And so that's where I have issues with the sandwich. One of my coachees one time said, well, then just do the open sandwich. I'm like, oh, that's brilliant. Open sandwich is a better method.
So okay, let's talk about criticism sandwich for a hot second, because what I found, especially when working with multicultural audiences, is that different cultures have different perceptions around what is kind of the context to set up a feedback conversation. And especially a lot of my UK colleagues, they would be a little bit more proper, a little bit more kind of reserved. And they're huge fans of the criticism sandwich.
Absolutely.
Whereas like my Aussie friends, they're just like straight to the punch because they don't care. They're going to go get a beer at the pub afterwards.
Here's the meat.
I'm curious, like, do you see people handling feedback and also failure in different ways based on their cultural upbringing or their preferences, or even the types of communities that they inhabit?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one of the ways I try to think about questions like that is through the lens of what's called the 5 layers of diversity.
Okay, for people who just listen to this, he's got slides for all of this. So we didn't prep any of these discussion topics. He's like, oh, I got a slide for this.
So, and just to explain this model, and this is not mine, it's by 2 amazing women in the Los Angeles area, Lee Garden-Schwartz and Anita Rowe. So I always give props to them. I'm actually friends with them now, just through their work. I'm just like, I love you. But anyway, they wanted to make sense on how we understand diversity. And I'm going to bring this up and I'll get to your question then in a second, Dan. But the idea is that we are all 5 layers as a human. And so the first layer is what they call personality. So at the core of everything is you are unique you. You're the only Dan, the only Alicia, the only Steve that will ever happen in the entire existence of humanity. Will never be another one of you. Personality makes us all unique and shiny individuals, which I love that. But the next layer out is the one that when I work with organizations, I work with leaders, they tend to go here, and it's called internal dimensions. And these are the things that, they don't really change a whole lot over your existence. Things like your age, which obviously changes each year, but I can't say I was born in 1987. No, that's not right. Or race, ethnicity, gender identity, physical ability, which asterisk on that because that can change over time, sexual orientation. But these are pretty much like locked in solid. They are what they are. But the next layer out is the external dimensions. And these are things that change sometimes daily. Things like your physical appearance, your religion, your education, your habits, your hobbies, all those types of things. And so it's really, it still contributes to how you look at the world differently because, hey, I am a parent. Well, you look at the world differently as a parent than as me as a canine parent or whatever that looks like. So external dimensions. And then organizational dimensions are kind of through the lens of whatever group you're with. So I'm in sales, I'm in marketing, I'm from this division, I'm from the North American division, I'm from Canada, or I'm from wherever, it doesn't matter. I also threw in the concept of legacy organizations because I too work with a lot of multinational groups who have mergers and acquisitions happening. And you still see like the us versus them concept. Yeah. Like, oh, you're from that old company. Like, well, you're still the same company, but you still have that. But that contributes again to how you look at the world. And then getting to the reason I brought this up for Dan is country of operation is the last layer that Lee and Anita kind of identify. And it's, the country that you're operating from does have an influence to some extent on how you look at the world. And so getting to your concept on feedback, I think this comes into play with, the one there it is, business etiquette. I don't know how newscasters do it, by the way, whether people would.
I don't know either.
It's been a year that I'm still getting used to this, but But, like business etiquette is somewhat dictated through the lens of my country of operation, but I don't think it's a norm. And so to answer your question in an insanely roundabout way, when I work with folks, and I have a lot of German national clients, I don't know how that happened. I don't speak German, but 3 of my biggest clients are like global mega companies, and they're all headquartered somewhere in Germany. So I don't know. But I see it happen when I work with them. Country of operation does come into play. However, I never assume that that's how every German I work with is.
Absolutely, yeah.
They're all 5 layers. And that's kind of the point of my little story here.
Whoa.
Wow. Masterclass with Dr. Steve. Wow.
I'm learning a whole lot in this conversation that I wasn't planning on.
Yeah, it's like I have a doctorate education.
Wait, that's really cool. Wait, what was your dissertation in?
So my doctorate is technically in instructional technology and distance education. So I wrote, and you can actually Google my dissertation because I totally wanted the ISBN credit, just because why not? But I developed an instrument to measure people's attitudes toward online learning, their attitudes toward, or their computer competence, and then their attitudes toward understanding how we learn using technology. Now, this is circa 2005. So I was like distance learning when it was cool, before it was cool, or not so cool, I guess, depending on how it's been executed in the world. But yeah, it was really fascinating. And I actually do use my own instrument for clients sometimes, which is kind of cool. But it was such a really I wasn't going to go down this path, and I was going to go for like instructional design and blah, blah. And a friend's like, you're really good at technology. You should look at this thing. It's really where things are going. I'm like, whatever. This is 2000. It's like 2000, actually. I'm like, whatever. I'll take a look at it. And ta-da, here we are.
Good suggestion, random friend.
Random friend.
That.
Don't speak German, which is fun. But, it's funny because, and joking aside, I have been very lucky at this moment in our collective history, because my passion's around leadership and inclusive leadership, and I've been doing that for quite a while. But I also can tell my story through this technology, through this means, and so it's been actually kind of fun. I do a lot of keynote speaking, and a lot of the folks were like, "Oh, are you comfortable doing virtual keynotes?" I'm like, "Hell yeah, let's bring it on!" So
it's dissertation right here, right up here.
Yeah.
So okay, I know we've talked about a lot of juicy things, and I feel like when you say something, it like makes me have an idea and I want to go grab it. And so, okay, we're obviously about failure here at the 2020 perspective. So how can someone like me be, try to avoid failure as far as being an inclusive person, inclusive peer, an inclusive, I'm not a formal leader in my organization, but I like to think I'm a leader of sorts.
So why are you avoiding it? You're on the 2020 perspective. You embrace it, right?
What?
You embrace failure.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about being inclusive.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
How does one avoid a failure while being, inclusive? Like the failure of not being inclusive. Like how could I, as a normal person,
right, there's one.
Me to do.
There's one. So language is key. So you said normal person as opposed to a non-normal person. So, and we all do these things, and that's okay. Then thank you that's a perfect example. And it's so being open to that kind of feedback where we all have our upbringing, all those synapses have been created, and that's fine. That's where the unconscious bias comes in. And so, like I use in my classes to kind of throw it out there, I grew up in the 80s, I turned 50 during a pandemic, awesome sauce. But, like when I would watch media and I would see a scientist, what did I see on, Magnum PI or the latest Bond movie? It's a middle-aged white dude, probably glasses and a lab coat. Cool. Then I go to the movie theater and I'm actually at the James Bond movie, and I see, if you're a James Bond fan, I see Q, which Q is who created Bond's cool gadgets. Well, middle-aged white dude. Cool. I go to my science class for 6th grade Steve, and he's standing in front of the room. Who's his teacher for that chemistry class? Middle-aged white dude. So these are, I think about it like we're a square of granite, and every time we get hit with one of these instances, it's a drip of water. Drip, 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 drip. And over time, as you've seen with some natural phenomena, that can erode depending on how many drips of water are there. So, we all have these. And the first step to answer your question, Alicia, is to know that we all will make mistakes. We all have our own lenses. We all have our drips of water that went on our granite, depending on just kind of how we grew up and how we were exposed in the media and who we hang out with. So that, if you are breathing, you have bias, period.
Yeah.
It's just knowing which biases you have. So, but that's the first step. I've worked with so many leaders who are like, I'm not biased. I have Black friends. I'm like, yeah, just let's back up for that one. So, but also it's being open to creating that space where people can provide that feedback and you're okay with it. And so, it's with my team, I'd be like, call me out if I mess things up, because I might say something, even though I live and then breathe in this space, I just don't know it. And that's where, creating that opportunity for leaders to say, I know I'm going to mess up. I totally want to be better. Hold me accountable for when I mess up. And that's the only way, that's one of the best ways I can learn, is to fail with saying something that maybe I don't think I should have said.
Right. Creating that psychologically safe space for others and for yourself.
Yep.
That's really the key, I think, because we all, like you said, I do this talk about, it's an introduction to unconscious bias. Now I want to say conscious leadership, but anyway, the Herman
no copyright on that. No copyright on that.
I'm going to use it now. Do you know the black and white Herman grid that I'm talking about? And when you look at it, it's an optical illusion. It's a grid, and it's like black and white. It looks like black boxes and like white grid. And when you look at it, your eyes do this little thing where the retina in your eyes, I think because the contrast of the black and white, you see little gray dots in between the intersections of the white. And so I like to use that to explain to people that this is how your unconscious bias works as well. And you can totally tell me that this is bull crud and that I should never say this again, but it's because we see something and we so strongly believe that it's there. Absolutely. Because you can see the gray dots, but it's actually your brain. And so when we have all this, all these experiences and, our education, the way we're raised, all the things that make up our lens, we naturally have those little gray dots.
Absolutely.
In your head. And so I tell people, check your gray dots, ask for feedback, to ask someone else, because you can't unsee what you believe is in your brain.
It's that thing that went around a couple of years ago with was it the blue dress or green dress or wherever they were? Yes. And it's exactly the same thing. Everyone was right, because it's just how your mind is processing that bit of data. And I think that's a beautiful point. And I think you should keep using that, because that's really awesome, because our perceptions are reality. Fantastic. But it doesn't mean it's reality of the person we're having a chat with. And I think that open-mindedness to having that difference is really at its foundation what allyship is about, is being open to the other, whatever the other is, to understand their perspective as best you can without having the opportunity to have lived it.
Right. And just acknowledge it and appreciate it. You don't have to necessarily agree, but you just have to acknowledge that there's a different perspective other than your own. And it's not wrong.
If I hear, all lives matter, I'm going to just the calm leadership respective person is about done with that, because that to me is people not really thinking about what they're saying. And and my favorite image that I've seen to refute that was there's two houses, one's on fire. There's a little person with a fire hose on the non-fire house, and above him he's like, all houses matter. Like, exactly. So and that's where please, listening, watching, whatever, I'm still on this journey too. I'm never going to be perfect and be like the most amazing ally to every group that's out there. I can't be. I can try to debias myself, which that is a true thing, and you can do that. But it's really just being able to, be okay with screwing up, with failing, but still have your heart centered that you want to do the best that you can do.
So let's say some of the, viewers or listeners are said, okay, I buy it. How do I debias myself? what's a good way of getting started? And also, this is a great time if you have anything that you offer to help people debias themselves. This is a great time to talk about that.
I'm not going to sell my wares now.
Okay.
So actually, I don't. This is for. This is going to be a really cheeky answer. Google mindfulness.
Ooh, I like that answer.
Yeah, free stuff. I don't really have any certain programs per se, but mindful meditation is one of the ways I recommend in every inclusive leadership program we do to start there. And if you're not familiar with mindfulness, it's the ability to kind of get out of your own mind and see things that you're doing, saying, thinking without judging. Helen Mauger is the mother of mindfulness, and it was kind of like paraphrasing her. And it's if you practice yoga, and you're in shavasana, it's kind of that too, where you're supposed to let your thoughts go without really judging them. It's kind of very similar, and this is not meant for just yogis and granola crunchy folks in the world. You have very senior level executives in Fortune 200s who are going through mindful meditation training.
Yeah.
So that they can understand when they're in that moment and they say that thing, is that the right thing to have said, yes or no? And so I think starting there, there's some awesome apps that you can do to help you. I actually personally use one. I don't get a kickback. I'm not gonna say which one, but there's a bunch of them out there. And so you can kind of play around with those as well. But mindfulness definitely would be my absolute first suggestion on your starting point.
I'm picking that up. I actually use an app on my phone to do self-reflection every single day. And that is part of my process of kind of rediscovering my purpose and rediscovering kind of what matters to me. And that helps me, at least it makes me feel like I'm a better human being. And at least putting it in the phone.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's great.
But you're consciously thinking about it, which is like a muscle, and you have to build it to, so that you can use it when it's time to use it.
Absolutely correct. Yep. It's like going to the gym.
Definitely.
You don't go once.
It's the soul gym. It's the soul gym.
Oh, I love that. That's like the name of the app right there. Soul Gym.
Mindfulness deadlifts and your your extension press of your compassion. Yeah.
I love it.
So, Steve, are there any last pearls of wisdom that you would like to share with listeners?
I would, and actually, as we've been talking and having this great conversation, and I've talked a lot about the concept of allyship and trying to be that consciously inclusive leader, which to me are the same thing. And one thing that kind of pops up, and I'm going to go away with my little cool app here and make myself, and I'm going to go away and I'm going to give you bigger. So this is what's called the Bennett scale, and it's the concept of understanding and being an effective ally. And I take no credit. I created the graphic because the ones I kept finding were really ugly, and I like to do graphics. But the concept is by Dr. Milton Bennett back in the 80s. And the concept here is, as an ally, you're on a path. It's not just like this, all of a sudden the next day I'm an ally. No, I'm a consciously inclusive leader. No, it's a journey. And so, and I won't go into too much detail and read through the whole thing, but the idea here is there's 6 steps. On one side of the scale is complete denial that there's any cultural difference. We're all the same. Blah blah blah. That people's experiences aren't different because of their ethnicity or insert any of those demographics in the 5 layers we talked about here. And then on the completely opposite side of that same scale is integration. And it's like, hey, I'm here to help. What can I do? And I think when we think about allyship, we go all the way to that 6th spot. But it's really those 3, the last 3 are really still all part of allyship. So if you're trying to be a consciously inclusive leader, maybe your first step is just acceptance that, people's experiences are different. And then that's okay. That's the starting point. You're at least over that center hump where you're not in the negative, if you will. And maybe it's adaptation. How can I have at least empathy? So the first one's kind of knowledge. The next one's kind of like more emotional centered. And then really the last one is allyship is truly an active experience. And so that's kind of where true consciously inclusive leadership is striving to get to.
Yeah. Oh,
love that.
That's great. And so for anyone just who's listening to the podcast, it's an amazing graphic that shows all of these different stages. I mean, it's super helpful and super, super informative and super easy to understand. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. That was great. Yeah, this has been fabulous. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. And thank you for the work you do, because I think, and the reason I was so excited to be on this podcast is so many people see the word failure as a negative, icky thing. And I think it's fantastic. And through the 3 times I've been fired, I've learned lots of cool stuff. And it really not is just about me, but it's also about, okay, how can I approach the next failure I'm going to have? And I think that's such an important message. So thank you for kind of having and sharing that out there.
Thanks to No BS Brass Band for the bangin' show music. Check them out at nobsbrass.com. And if you want to join any of our live shows, follow us on Facebook at the 2020 Perspective. That's 20/20 Perspective. As always, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast player so you can get the latest failures delivered right to your ears. And may your failures be spectacular.